colleagues, comrades, Owen Seymour Arthur.
Thank you, Sir Henry. And it was wonderful to hear your golden voice again. Party Chairman, Executive, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the media, distinguished delegates of the Barbados Labour Party, friends. The year that has just passed will have to go down as the most remarkable and in its own special way, one of the most successful in our party's long history. One of the most important and impressive characteristics, and perhaps the greatest glory of our Barbados Labour Party, is not that we never fall, but that every time we fall, we rise again, stronger, wiser, and more resolute. These past few years have been years that have tested our party's soul. Those tests sometimes came with an agony that was hard to bear. But there is a special Barbados Labour Party way and a special Barbados Labour Party spirit that was available to us on which to draw. For us, it is and must always be service before self. We must never fail our nation. And we must always remember that our party was created to make doing extraordinary things our ordinary business, even when and especially when that business is our own party's affairs. Our challenges were severe, but we faced them and we fixed them. And today we stand ready, united, and strong. We stand ready to once again secure a great electoral victory. We also stand ready in our people's name and on our people's behalf to bring our nation out of this valley of desolation that the DLP has lodged it in. I begin my address to you today by thanking all for the remarkable spirit of camaraderie that enables us now to be able to march forward in unison. On my return to this office, I publicly told Mayor that our party and our country needs her. I especially now salute her contribution to the party and the country over the past year, and Mayor, please stand and be recognized by your party. And I wish warmly to salute and to congratulate those who have received special awards this morning. Clyde and the 12 ladies on the forefront for wonderfully exemplifying those special attributes of commitment, loyalty, and devotion to the service of this party, which helped to make the last year so special. What was at times so hard to bear is now becoming sweet to remember. I am proud to be a Labourite. I also love my country. But like you, and like so many of our citizens, I feel a great sense of despair about what is being done to it. by the absolutely worst administration in the history of our land. And as we reflect on the horror movie which has unfolded in Barbados, we ourselves should draw from it certain object lessons to take with us into the future as we look once again to constitute the government of this nation. The first is that the Dems in office have behaved as if they own Barbados. However, as we look to retain office, we must pledge that we will never act as if Barbados belongs to the Barbados Labour Party for us to do with it, its resources and its institutions, that which is pleasing only to ourselves and to our supporters. We must seek to build a truly inclusive society, resting on the strongest foundations of social justice, a society for all. If and when we get an opportunity to serve, we must give of our very best to pursue only the nation's and the people's business. For what has happened in Barbados over the past 4 years has been a disaster brought about from the politics of the fatted calf. It has been a failure of the practice of party paramountcy that has taken the form of the use of the financial resources of the taxpayers and the state to pay for a governing party's political programs. It has taken the form of the disgraceful use of state-owned institutions like the CBC as agencies of the party. I say to you this morning, on the eve of a historic victory, such things must have no place in the political affairs of our modern Barbados. The second object lesson is that serious and inspiring goals have to be set for the nation to achieve, and the achievement of those goals must be the chief occupation of a party in government. Chief among such goals must be the creation of conditions for the attainment of full and civilized development, for the eradication of poverty, for the generation of full employment, for the establishment of exemplary standards of government, and for the building of a just and a cohesive society. Trifling around and playing around with the politics of politics must not be enough for us. As the recent experience of the Dems have shown, you can win power, but will not govern effectively if your mandate does not rest on a strong program to develop this nation, or if it rests on whimsical promises to provide duty-free cars, interest-free mortgages, free homes, and the like, that were intended only as promises to win the support of certain groups. The third lesson that we must draw from the recent experience of the Dems is that governments exist to make things happen for the greater and for the common good. Governments must make the best possible decisions, hold themselves accountable to the people for those decisions, and must let the results work for them. Inertia, however, is not and cannot be an option for our Barbados. In this vein, you must allow me to reflect for a moment on the most profound disaster that has entrenched itself in our Barbados of late, the crisis of leadership. We have been informed by an authority that is beyond challenge, the Eager 11 of the Democratic Labour Party, that inertia exists like a black hole at the center of this DLP administration. I do believe that the situation may be a bit worse than that. The Eager 11 got it wrong. Inertia refers to a situation when somebody is awake but is inactive. Frandil has, however, confirmed that he has been sound and fast asleep. I know that he delights in giving us the benefit of his vast knowledge of biblical quotations. I recommend that he adds to his repertoire. He can, for example, turn for guidance to Proverbs chapter 6, verse 6. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? And he should be moved by Proverbs chapter 6, verse 10. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Or better still, as a leader of people, he may want to refer to and to be instructed by the example that is described in Psalm 121, verses 3 and 4. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. For a good measure, Frandil the sleeper may feel that all is not lost. He may still qualify to earn some foreign exchange for Barbados by winning contracts to do advertisements for either Slumberess or Posturepedic, the makers of fine mattresses. Comrades, it is a view now commonly shared by most Barbadians that the challenges which the next administration will have to contend with will be the most formidable to face any government in this country since independence. The new and the brutal reality is that there is no area of life in Barbados which is free from crisis, free from blundering, free from fumbling, or free from disorder. Indeed, the ineptitude of this government finds its perfect metaphor in the fact that what was intended to be the greatest accomplishment of this administration, the showpiece housing complex at Coverley, has now virtually ground to a halt. The inability to fix things or to make them happen for the better is illustrated across a wide range of fiascos. These include the Alexander School fiasco, the inability to make things right with the clique of policyholders and investors. The hoax that is the project at Pickering, the unfolding disaster at the Barbados Water Authority, the many different ways in which a new hospital is to be built without a site being chosen for it, the drift at Paradise, the unfolding mess at Bagatelle, the $175 million crisis at UWI. However, in a very real sense, two words, and two words alone, capture what should and which will forever stand as the legacy of this DLP administration. As regards the economy, that word is junk. And in respect of the governance of this country, that word is lawlessness. The two great challenges that therefore must be successfully met by your next BLP government is, on the first part, to rebuild an economy that has been reduced to junk. The second is to restore Barbados' long tradition for sound, efficient, effective, and stable government which has hitherto created the stability on which our national development has been founded. I turn first, comrades, to the economy. Nothing separates the two political parties of Barbados more than our differences and our contrasting position on the management and the development of our economy. We fully understand in the Barbados Labour Party that man cannot live by bread alone. We also fully understand that the task of building a nation must begin with the establishment of a secure national identity. It also requires the bringing together in a harmonious and coherent way in the economic, the social, the cultural, the political, and the psychological realms to forge a society that can progressively meet the needs and the expectations of the broad mass of its people. We understand that. We of the BLP, however, also firmly believe that central to nation building is the sustained growth and development of a sound and a strong economy, which provides the wherewithal to meet the material needs of the people, to enable us to create good jobs, and to enable this society to remove the vestiges of poverty from its midst. Managing an economy, I say to Barbados, managing an economy properly matters. The Barbados Labour Party therefore takes great pride in our efforts to manage and to develop our Barbadian economy over the decades. We also treat it, colleagues, as a badge of honor that we are accused by our opponents of paying too much attention to the economy. By contrast, the people of Barbados have come to feel in the most disgracefully painful way the disastrous consequences when a government such as that of the DLP feels that it does not have to put the management of the economy at the front and at the center of its attention. The consequence has been that Barbados has been transformed from being among the best managed and the best performing economy in the Caribbean to being among the worst, not just in the Caribbean, but globally. Indeed, all of the major indicators of performance have shown serious decline. And as such, the concept of junk not only applies to the country's credit rating, but can be applied to every aspect of government policies and every aspect of the DLP's economic performance. First, for the first time ever over the term of a government, our economy is being returned to the people smaller than at the start of that government's term. The value of what Barbados has produced has declined by 6% since 2007. Secondly, our people have become poor. The incidence of poverty in poor too. The incidence of poverty in 2010 was 19.7% of the population as compared to 12% in 1998. Per capita income, the average income of the ordinary Barbadian has dropped from $28,018 in 2007 to $26,222 in 2011. That performance amounts to junk. The bite has been largely felt in the pocketbooks of Barbadians of every class. Prices have risen by over 30% since 2007, while incomes of Barbadians, especially in the public sector, have been largely frozen. The pinch of poverty is now being felt everywhere, for the fastest growing items in the retail price indices have not been luxuries, but they have been basic goods. The price of fuel and light has increased by 62% since 2007. Food, a basic, by 35%. As performance goes, that is junk. The dismal performance also hurts where it matters most: access to jobs. Unemployment in Barbados has risen from 6.7% in December 2007 to 12.5% at June 2012. In the interval, the number of persons employed has declined by almost 10,000 persons over the 4 years. So, Frandel and Chris Sinclair, we are not seeking office to do that which you have done for yourself, sent home 10,000 good Barbadian citizens. There's also a significant amount of short weeks and much underemployment in Barbados. This is junk. People and enterprises in Barbados are now saving less and investing less. Households and companies under this DLP have had to draw down over $1 billion in savings between 2007 and 2011 just to make ends meet in this land. Investments have fallen by over $600 million over the period, a 31% decline. This performance, colleagues, is junk. The sectors where the greatest progress should be made have also been the areas where the greatest difficulties are being experienced. It has to be junk for a government to allow 2,700 jobs and billions in new income and investment to go begging in the international business sector purely by reason of its failure to act. As regards the tourism industry, the most recent statistics show that arrivals were down by 13.6% for August, 6.4% for September, and 11.1% for the first 19 days of October this year. Arrivals for this year, when we have to depend upon tourism, could fall by 9%. The Caribbean Tourism Organization has shown that in regard to the percentage change in arrivals of the 24 countries in that organization, Barbados was 22nd on the list, the third from the bottom, and only one of 6 countries which registered a decline this year. Over the past 4 years, the industry has lost some 30 hotel apartments and guest houses, amounting to 1,300 rooms. While all of this has been happening, the Barbados Tourism Authority has been starved of funds. Indeed, at this moment of crisis, our tourism authority finds itself unable to pay its creditors or to mount new programs to bring our industry back from the brink, while this wasteful government pumps thousands of dollars into a political football tournament. Colleagues, this is junk. It is also junk for a government of Barbados to so mismanage the country's public finances that it has to borrow almost $500 million every year, not to create new capital assets for the future, but to pay its current bills. It is junk for the government to pretend and to keep telling the people that its fiscal strategy is on track and it is working when it owes the UWI over $170 million, when companies and people cannot get back their tax refunds, and when some of you public employees living from paycheck to paycheck cannot get monies due to you on a timely basis. It is junk, colleagues, for the government to allow the Barbados National Oil Company to rake in over $200,000 in profits from the sale, $200 million, in profits from its sale of fuel oil to Barbados Light and Power. As part of its effort, it says, to recover losses of $100 million, they take in $200 million, giving rise to the 62% increase in the price of electricity with which you have been penalized. That has to be junk. It is also junk for the government to have imposed a $100 million increase in taxes in 2008 on an economy about to go into recession. It has been even more junk for it to keep increasing the rate of tax on the economy as it got smaller and smaller and smaller. Above all, it is junk for the government to believe that you can get prosperity from the imposition of policies to create austerity. A change has to come. On its present course, the Barbados economy will continue in a downward spiral that can lead to loss of all the gains that we have realized since independence. We of the Barbados Labour Party are proud of the record of achievements we recorded as a government between 1994 and 2008 in developing our economy. But I say to you that as the next government of Barbados, we do not propose to simply return to old policies or even to the old familiar ways of doing things. Indeed, in a world rocking with change, new questions must be asked and new answers sought to old questions. For example, we can no longer look to protectionist instruments such as licenses or quotas to assist agriculture and manufacturing as could have been done before 1994. In addition, the unique tax benefit with Canada that helped to make Barbados the third largest location for Canadian investors in the world is no longer available to us only, but is now also available to our neighbors in the Caribbean who are anxious and doing their best to snatch business from us. One-way duty-free access for our exports to the markets of our traditional partners is coming to an end with the new EPA with Europe and with the proposed new trade agreement with Canada. In addition, the regime of fiscal incentives that has been used to develop our manufacturing and our international business industry is being challenged before the WTO, and we have a waiver on the use of such incentives until 2015. New instruments, new policies and programs to make Barbados more competitive, to create growth by relying more on innovation and increased productivity, to create growth by relying on a new culture to spur entrepreneurship as a tool of development, and the radical removal of all of the constraints on doing business in our land must be urgently pressed into service as the basis upon which we put this country back on a path for growth. For these to be successful, however, there must be an immediate and a comprehensive reversal of the main policies which the Democratic Labour Party has recently, over 4 years, imposed on the people. It is very clear that most of these policies were recommended by the International Monetary Fund. The increase in the VAT, the removal of the tax-free allowances, the new taxes on energy products, the increase in fees charged by government agencies, the pursuit of macroeconomic policies to depress local demand, ostensibly to protect the foreign exchange reserves, when those reserves were at a level in excess of the most needed for safety. All of these were policies contained in Article 4 surveillance report of the International Monetary Fund. The reason why those policies must be reversed is not only because they have failed, but because the very authors of these policies are confessing that they have not and they cannot work in our Barbados. We were, comrades, if you will recall, being constantly assured by the central bank that these policies were working. Indeed, the governor of the central bank even recently assured the public that there were no alternative to the policies that this government was pursuing. It is therefore necessary that the people of Barbados be informed of what the governor of the central bank said at a breakfast meeting in Japan on October the 14th, 2012, to the managing director of the IMF and to the president of the World Bank, and I quote him slowly. I quote. He said, over bacon and eggs. He said, we persistently and consistently get bad advice from the International Monetary Fund. I have worked in central banks for almost 40 years. So I know and I have known the IMF through many iterations. And I have worked for the fund itself for 10 years. And we have consistently got bad advice on our policy options because the model is wrong. And we need to change that if you are going to be helpful to us going forward. This is not me. This is Dr. Delisle Worrell. The advice is bad, he says. The model is wrong. The IMF model, which Dr. Worrell told the fund is wrong, but which he has been telling the Barbados public is right, is one that seeks to cure economic problems by reducing spending through means that take money out of people's pockets, through increased taxes, increased fees, wage freezes, and the like. We have been pleading with the government ever since 2008 to let our people keep more money in their pockets so that their spending can help to keep this economy away. And with the foreign exchange reserves at record levels, we have called for measures to stimulate demand at home for Barbadian goods and services to help create the conditions for the economy to grow. We have called and will continue to call for the reversal of the punitive taxes and fees that have driven our economy into the ground and further into recession. We have pointed out the folly of policies which have driven energy prices sky high and our economy into the ground. We have pleaded and continue to plead for tax relief for the middle class and for the return of the allowances, all to no avail. So for the governor of the central bank to give the IMF lectures on how wrong their policies have been in Barbados, while he has been so enthusiastic a supporter of them in public in Barbados, is for him to rub salt into our wounds. We, however, agree entirely with the governor that there has to be a fundamental change in the macroeconomic policies being pursued by the government of Barbados, and that an IMF-type model is unlikely to get the job done for us. Happily as a party, we have had to go the non-IMF way before, and successfully so. In 1994, we assumed office and found a secret deal in place with the IMF for the government to implement an enhanced surveillance program in Barbados, featuring demand reduction, the increase in fees, rent, and taxes all across the board. We chose not to pursue it. We chose rather to trust the people. We chose to trust the people by giving them incentives to help build Barbados by saving and investment. We gave new incentives to industries earning foreign exchange. Since energy is such a critical input, we systematically decided to reduce taxes on all energy products. We reformed the indirect tax system by introducing the VAT at 15% where it needs to return. We radically reduced the tax on companies from 40% to 25%, and on small businesses from 40% to 12.5%. We radically reformed the income tax and the land tax. We liberalized the telecommunications sector. We introduced special legislation to promote development in areas such as Speightstown, St. Lawrence Gap, and Bridgetown. We introduced special technical assistance program to restructure enterprises in agriculture and manufacturing. We created Fund Access, an enterprise growth fund to provide concessional finances to micro and small businesses. And when Barbados' vital economic interests were challenged as they were threatened by the OECD, we vigorously defended those interests to the death and succeeded in giving Barbados a competitive advantage in the world as an international business and financial center among developing countries. Comrades, we did not sit back and wait for the rest of the world to create a favorable environment within which to operate. We created one at home. And it was based on the notion that the government must trust the people. And in so doing, it must do all in its power to empower our citizens and our enterprises to maximize their contribution to the growth and development of their nation while maximizing their corporate and their personal welfare. This morning, I bring you a simple message. We seek office again, not for the sake of power. We seek office to bring again a similar, proactive, can-do spirit to the management of this country's economic affairs. We fundamentally believe that the government must go as far as possible, as fast as possible, to stimulate domestic activity in Barbados as part of the effort to put Barbados back on the path to growth and development. To get this country and the economy going again, the Barbados Labour Party will do once more that which we've always done well. We have to put more money back in the people's pockets. For this reason, we support the introduction of a new middle-income tax rate to allow those earning $100,000 or less and liable to tax to pay tax at no higher rate than a new tax rate of 25%. In addition, the payment of land tax based on the new higher valuations of property is proven to be a great drain on the pockets of too many of our Barbadian households. We therefore propose that persons owning homes valued at more than $150,000, because you don't pay land tax on the first $150,000 in value, thanks to the Labour Party, that persons owning properties worth more than $150,000 should have to pay the land tax not on the full value above the $150,000, but only on 50% of that improved value. It is also urgent that the energy pricing and taxation policies pursued by the DLP, which has raped the private sector and has bankrupted almost every household in Barbados, has to be reversed as a matter of urgency. In the course of this coming campaign, we will constructively engage the public on the major new initiatives we will introduce to rescue and stimulate our productive sectors, address the issue of food security, transform the financial industry of Barbados, rehabilitate the Scotland district, revitalize the north, and build our major urban areas, I don't know how you feel about British Young, and revitalize our housing and construction industry. We will also address the need for the urgent implementation of the policies for the green economy and for the development of alternative energy, which were first set out in my budget of 2007, and for which Liz Thompson received an international award. Today, I focus on two special issues which must be pursued because of their strategic importance to the future growth and development of this country. I speak first about building an economy for the young. A fundamental aspect of any future transformation of the Barbados economy must entail the deliberate design of an economic system that can specifically accommodate the aspirations of our youth. By this I mean that we just cannot design an economy and hope that young people will fit into it. Rather, we must deliberately design our economic policies and structures with young people in mind and allow more of our growth, development, and the earning of foreign exchange to come from occupations that young people want to pursue and from which those young people themselves can make lucrative careers. The potential benefits that can come from such a developmental approach is massive because Barbados has barely scratched the surface in tapping into the vast market areas in which the services of young people are greatly in demand and where they fetch extraordinarily high prices. I think immediately of the international professional sports market, the field of entertainment and cultural activities, and the vast range of service activities that draw upon the creative imagination of our youth. The time is especially ripe for more young Barbadians to be equipped to tap into international sports market as professionals, especially in relation to football. And I warn you now, that if I become Prime Minister again, I want to be Minister of Sports. I want to be Minister of Sports. Thanks to the previous Barbados Labour Party administration, sporting organizations are now drawing $13 million a year from the lotteries. Arrangements should be made to enable them to have access to at least $25 million to begin with, so that they can give more professional contracts to natural sportsmen and can support development programs to develop our young people to the stage where they can win contracts to perform as professionals in the global sports market arena. The David Thompson football competition honors the dead. We want to advance the interests of the living. We also introduced into Barbados the Innovation Fund. We need now to capitalize that to the extent of at least $20 million a year to begin with, and to commit to expand it as necessary to enable young people involved in economic activities as software development, film, video, music, fashion, electronic games, and appliances to have access to concessional financing to be able to enable them to follow their dreams. In 2007, we left office with a cultural industries and creative economy bill ready to be used to transform the creative landscape of Barbados. It has remained in draft for 4 years while our young people have languished. That legislation will and must be acted upon as a matter of urgency. The government of Barbados also needs to invest in at least 3 mini stadia in the north, the center, and the south of Barbados to allow professional sports to take hold in this country. In addition, the Barbados Coalition of Service Industries was formed by the previous Barbados Labour Party administration to organize our non-traditional service providers, most of whom are young, and to help them to build capacity to supply the domestic market and to penetrate foreign markets as services become more open to them through trade liberalization. The budget of that organization has been ravaged by the DLP. It has been cut by the same $600,000 that the Democratic Labour Party is giving to do a football tournament in honor of a dead man. We pledge to fully support the Coalition of Service Industries and to make it one of our nation's leading economic organizations. For I say to you today, our young service providers selling their services in the new evolving global economy in ways made possible by the revolution in information technology represents the best hope for a dramatic transformation of our economy, and it is an opportunity for transformation that we do not intend to miss. Secondly, for the foreseeable future, Barbados's growth and development must take place in an environment where policy instruments that were of decisive importance in the past, such as unique tax benefit, trade preferences, fiscal incentives regime, will diminish in significance in the future. The next phase of Barbados's development must therefore be predicated on a strong strategic information communication technology platform that is truly world-class. As far back as the year 2000, Caribbean leaders recognized the shift to knowledge-based economies and committed to accelerating the use of information and communication technology for advancing the economic and social development of our region. That's where we liberalize the sector. Our telecommunication infrastructure remains critical to Barbados's development, not just as an industry in its own right, but as a necessary pillar in the growth and development of other industries, and especially our service sector. Indeed, a recent World Bank study of middle and lower income countries concluded that broadband penetration can lead to an increase of 1.38% of GDP. Going forward, our national information communication technology success requires governmental leadership. This must begin with the harmonization of all ICT functions within government, within and under one ministry umbrella, rather than it is today spread across many industries. Certain fundamentals which were part of the communication reform process that began in the year 2000 must again be brought to the front burner and again given urgent attention. In this regard, we must implement number portability, pursue the enactment of data protection, as well as develop legislation that addresses cybersecurity in particular. Government must also use the provisions within the Telecommunication Act to establish policies which make broadband provision the minimum service standard as part of the universal service obligation of telecommunication licenses granted in Barbados. The reform agenda for the future must have at its core broadband internet access at high speed and at affordable cost across the length and the breadth of this country. This approach, comrades, is critical for stimulating productivity and innovation. It has been shown in advanced countries that broadband internet access by the wider population has improved social and economic benefits across the board. We recognize the opportunity that ICT holds for high-value job creation. As one of its priorities, training and partnership with established IT institutions will be central to our future policies. Especially so, a new service and technology-driven economy that especially caters to the needs of the new youth requires a new concept of an industrial park. Such industrial parks in the future are ones that must facilitate centers of excellence in ICT. As such, we will not create traditional industrial parks. We will now think in terms of cyber parks that can accommodate operations such as software development, advanced research and training facilities that give opportunities for other foreign direct investments in areas such as animation, webcasting, and mobile application technologies, to name but a few. We continue to offer our support to other private sector business initiatives, and especially the efforts of the Barbados Entrepreneurship Foundation in seeking to facilitate the provision of free Wi-Fi across the length and the breadth of this country. But I say to you this morning that there's an even more critical task for your next government. The changes that have to be made to create conditions for strong growth, especially strong private sector growth, requires that some detailed attention be paid to devising new arrangements for our country's economic governance. And it is beyond dispute that in its efforts to generate growth in the economy, government, in addition to focusing on the macroeconomic policies, must also focus on the laws, the institutions, and the regulations that have an impact, and indeed provide form and structure to daily economic activity by entities across the country. The challenge which the government faces must successfully resolve is that of acting on the one hand in the public interest, while at the same time acting as a facilitator of business rather than its biggest constraint. I now need to spell out to you why dealing with business facilitation may well turn out to be the matter which decides, above all else, the future of the Barbados economy. Every year, a global competitiveness report is published. And the report for 2012-2013 ranks our Barbados as 44th in relation to its overall competitiveness among our countries. This ranking, though fourth in Latin America and the Caribbean, is down 2 points from the previous year. We were 42nd the year before. Of concern is the fact that inefficient government bureaucracy and the lack of access to funding were identified in the survey of private sector as the two most problematic factors for doing business in Barbados. The negative impact of poor business facilitation has already, under the DLP, dealt a cruel blow to our international business sector. According to the CEO of Invest Barbados, speaking on Down to Brass Tacks on Tuesday, October the 25th, a year ago, during the last 2 to 3 years, Barbados missed out on $1 billion of investment and 2,700 job opportunities in international business sector. This is not because of the global economy, he said. He indicated that the information was based on the records which Invest Barbados keep about discussions they have with companies which had expressed interest in Barbados, and he provided details, and which had provided details of the investment and jobs that they could provide. These investments, 2,000 jobs and $1 billion in investment, did not get off the ground for reasons which included slow responses to application for incentives and licenses, and failure by the government to amend or pass new legislation to meet the needs of the market. Inertia. There can be no more half measures in promoting business facilitation in this country if the price we pay is a price that is as savage as this. And while this government is displaying all of the symptoms of chronic implementation deficit disorder, other countries are taking deliberate steps to make it easier for entities to do business in their jurisdictions. Indeed, countries from Rwanda to Britain are aggressively reforming their regulatory regimes to enhance their competitiveness and to make it easy to do business. On the other hand, in our Barbados, the IDB loan to fund a Barbados competitiveness project is marked by major delays. Your government, your Labour Party government, will make improved business facilitation a key strategy in generating growth in this country. In this and other matters, there must be timely decision-making by government. Inertia is not a substitute for action, neither is equivocation, such as we hear from the DLB ministers, an option when private sector investment, jobs, and growth are at stake. The lack of focus on business facilitation in Barbados at this time is perhaps most sharply reflected in the fact that there is no information on Barbados in the annual World Bank's Doing Business report, which is produced every year. You will find information in that report on every other country in the world, but nobody now knows what are our conditions for doing business. The last time Barbados was included in the report was in 2007. We are therefore not in a position in this critical matter to compare our performance against that of competitors for trade and investment. And while we move slowly on reforms, the United Kingdom, though ranked at number 7, very high, in terms of the ease of doing business, is not prepared to rest on its laurels, but has launched several initiatives to simplify its regulatory system and free up the private sector's capacity to innovate, to diversify, and to expand. These include, and I'm talking about Britain, a competitive economy. These include a comprehensive review of existing regulations to identify those that could be removed, simplified, or approached in a different way. What a wonderful country we would have if we had a government that was prepared to do that. Additionally, the government of Great Britain has directed that new regulations must be assessed for their cost to business and that they must be reviewed after a maximum of 7 years, to quote, to justify their continuation rather than simply leaving them on the books. Consider what would happen to our country if we could adopt the model of Great Britain. The status quo is not an option. Nothing short of comprehensive reform will suffice if we are to engender private sector-led growth. I therefore propose that a new Labour Party government will re-engineer government's operation on an e-government platform, which will use information technology to flatten government's hierarchical structure, to allow for simultaneous processing by different departments, and to speed up decision-making. I further propose ongoing review of commercial law and regulations by a new public-private sector commercial law commission. And our party is committed to working with the Chamber of Commerce, the Small Business Association, the Barbados Entrepreneurship Foundation, and all other private sector bodies to make our country the very best place for doing business in the world. I could not leave this conference today. I'm not ready to leave without saying a very special word on the aspect of the management of the economy, which is likely to be the most controversial, but where sound, new, innovative approaches are urgently required. It concerns the management of our public finances. It is clear to all that the government of Barbados currently cannot pay its bills. It is equally clear that it is not going to be able to continue to expand expenditure, especially in areas that are of strategic importance to the well-being of the Barbadian society. Adjustments have to be made. Dealing with this matter is where the government and the Minister of Finance have shown their greatest failing. There has been no clear thinking, no new innovative approach. Rather, Chris Sinclair has given us the full benefit of his vast ignorance and inexpertise on financial matters, and has brought to bear, to the fullest extent, a crude, autocratic, and duplicitous nature where such is not needed. Sinclair himself has this year ordered not one, but 2 sets of cuts to expenditure by ministries. But yet he will wage it to have it appear in the public that he is above doing such things, and that it is we, the Barbados Labour Party, that wants to come back to office to cut government spending to be able to send home people. He also functions like a doctor who, while doing surgery on somebody's head, prefers to use an axe rather than a scaffold. For as happened with the cuts to the drug service, wild swings were made to cut everything in a manner that seriously hurt our pensioners and those having special circumstances that need special care, who ought not to have been made subject to cuts and chops in the access to drugs. And it is especially duplicitous for Sinclair to have announced, as he has, that the DLP wants to privatize major public enterprises and to reduce government transfers to statutory boards. He said that they want to do those things. But then seek to falsely suggest that the Barbados Labour Party has concocted some secret plan to be used to send home 10,000 public servants by pursuing the very privatization and cuts in transfers that he said are needed. Above all, the government's approach to the crisis in its expenditures fundamentally reflects its inability to govern. Listen to me very carefully. When far-reaching decisions have to be taken that can affect people's access to benefits and entitlements, government must not act crudely, nor must it act unilaterally. It must build a consensus for what needs to be done. We faced such a situation when we had to reform the National Insurance Scheme. Left unaddressed, the National Insurance was going to go bankrupt by the early 2030s. Major changes had to be introduced to save it and to ensure its future financial viability. Some of those changes could have been unpopular. What did we do? We didn't do a Sinclair. We put together a task force led by the late Stephen Allen, brought all of the stakeholders together, put the best minds of Barbados together, and came up with a set of new policies and arrangements that were acceptable to all and that account for the very favorable position in which the NIS now finds itself. We have proposed to government over and over again that a similar approach, putting a task force together, putting the best minds in the country together, to find a consensus acceptable to all, is needed to deal with the crisis in the public finances. I've said it 3 times on the floor of Parliament. But it has fallen on deaf ears. We have gone as far as to set out proposals which we think we can help. And even though the government is not listening, I wish to repeat some of them again today. First, it is the Barbados Labour Party's policy that if adjustments have to be made to our citizens' access to services paid for by the state, across-the-board cuts must not be made. Different classes of people are in different circumstances and have different needs. You cannot expect an old age pensioner to have to pay for access to drugs when they get old. When they get old, payment access to drugs is what keeps you alive. It is inhumane and uncivilized to cut a drug service but ask pensioners now to start to pay. Wrong! We can change that. So you can't have across-the-board cuts. The poor, our senior citizens, those with disabilities, and those having special needs must continue to enjoy free access to critical public services in this country. Secondly, if adjustments have to be made, government should provide incentives to allow citizens whose income are above the threshold where it is liable to tax and the private sector to fill the void in the provision of private social services which government may leave behind. We have referred to it, and we will refer to it in our manifesto as a new program of fiscal incentives for social transformation. It will include providing tax credits for persons who buy health insurance to allow them to offset the cost of accessing health care through insurance on the private market. It will include full tax credits for savings in registered education saving plans to allow parents such as myself to pay for their students' education. I may say, and I can acknowledge it, that as Minister of Finance, I made a mistake in how I structured that. I introduced a registered education saving plan, but I only allowed people to get relief from the withholding tax or the interest. The next Barbados Labour Party government will tell you that if you are saving money to educate your children, you're not only going to get a relief from the interest that you earn on the saving plan, but everything you put into the saving plan will come to you as a credit. In this way, people, because you have to trust the people, people can be empowered to take more responsibility for their personal welfare, and a potential problem can be converted into an opportunity. Third, we propose that special incentives be provided to the private sector to make investments in new healthcare and in educational facilities, treating them as areas for private sector growth in the future. We do not believe that the government has to spend $1 billion on a new hospital. Fix up the QEH, expand the scope of services being rendered by polyclinics to let them take some pressure off the QEH, but give incentives for people to build a modern, new hospital in this country, saving $1 billion in new debt. But in any case, they can't build it because there has never been a hospital here in the world that has been built above ground, and they have not yet found a place to build theirs. Fourth, we are prepared to go as far as possible in respect to the privatization of state enterprises on the understanding that the proceeds are not used to meet current bills, but are used to pay down the public debt or to support public sector capital development. And fifth, we strongly support the use of private-public sector partnerships on matters such as the revitalization of Bridgetown and Spikestown, which have now gone into decay, as ways by which the private sector's role in the economy can expand as government's expenditure is brought under control. Leave it to us. If there is a problem, we will face it and we will fix it. Colleagues, I said there were two issues, junk and a lawless government. I choose to speak at this annual conference more fully than I have ever had at any previous conference on matters relating to the rule of law and the need for a new governance in Barbados. Barbados' progress has been based on a few things. High on the list has been our long tradition of stability and good governance, the hallmarks of which has been adherence to the rule of law, accountability, and transparency by both the public and the civil society in the conduct of their various affairs. That tradition of good governance is systematically being undermined. It is being undermined by the worst of tyrannies. The worst of tyrannies is a lawless government. At the very best of times, this DLP government has done wrong in spite of the law. At the worst of times, it has changed the law for the sake of wrong. By its actions, it has undermined public confidence in our state institutions, and it has set about to destroy some of these institutions for the sake of its own survival. The Democratic Labour Party came to power in part on the strength of a pretended commitment to good governance. But from the very outset, it was apparent that this was a commitment that was never intended to be kept, or at the very least, that they were willing to discard when it suited their purposes. My comrades, it bears repeating over and over again that on the eve of the last general election, the DLP erected billboards through this country in flagrant contravention of the Town and Country Planning Act. When this breach was pointed out to them, the callous and contemptuous response of the then leader of the opposition, one David Thompson, was that by the time the chief town planner could do anything about it, the election would be over. Surely, behave. Surely, this contempt for our laws at that time in opposition ought to have forewarned us of what was to come. Can it be reasonable to expect a private citizen to comply with the Town Planning Act or any other act in the face of such outrageous defense of the law by the Democratic Labour Party? It also bears repeating that the Transport Board clearly prohibits, the Transport Board Act clearly prohibits the Transport Board from selling petroleum products. Yet this administration, in flagrant breach of the clear intent of this statute, has established a regime where the Transport Board is now selling diesel. It bears repeating that this administration, in breach of the Barbados Water Authority Act, installed one Arnie Walters into an unlawful position of executive director and placed the management of the Water Authority in his hands, under which would be about $800,000 in taxpayers' money, when the Act stated clearly that the management of the authority was the duty of the general manager and the general manager alone. This administration persists in giving national housing properties to tenants in circumstances where it is unlawful for the National Housing Corporation to make gifts of any of its properties under the Housing Act. We have pointed out to the Democratic Labour Party in Parliament that they are acting in contravention of the Act, and that if they intended to pursue this policy, the Act must be amended. But this advice has been ignored and continues to be ignored. Is it any wonder, therefore, that in the halls of government, in cabinet, we are now reduced to the state of the wild, wild west. Is it not the wild, wild west when a minister of the crown spits in the face of the long-standing doctrine of collective responsibility by directing the staff and management of the Barbados Water Authority not to meet with the Minister of Finance? And is it not equally scandalous that such an assault on the principles of good governance should have been accepted and allowed to go unanswered by the Prime Minister and the Chairman of Cabinet? Perhaps he was in his sleep. How do we accept the bizarre situation of an arm of government, the Barbados Water Authority, which contracted in good faith and with the knowledge of the Minister of Finance for the construction and financing of a new headquarters facility? But then the Minister of Finance now appears to be refusing to sign the required letter of comfort. In its original manifesto prior to 2008, the DLP embraced the principle of the fatted calf, by which they promised to enrich those who voted for the party at the expense of those who could not be identified as its active supporters. It has to be a matter of deep national disgrace that the practice of the principle of the fatted calf has afflicted almost every major state and national institution in this country. Due to its high visibility, the CBC has become the most obvious and obnoxious manifestation of government's unjust manipulation of the state agencies and institutions for its benefit. The government has transformed the nightly newscast into an hour of undiluted partisan propaganda with the dual purpose of promoting the narrow interests of the DLP while silencing the legitimate voice of any contrary opinion in Barbados. The DLP has also been rampant in seeking to place its perceived supporters in strategic positions at the expense of others who were in legitimate occupation of those offices. The Barbados High Court recently vindicated the victimized former director of the UDC in circumstances that the court described, and I quote them, as reprehensible in the extreme. But we would not and could not have anticipated in our Barbados that a DLP government will also come to interfere in the internal affairs of the Royal Barbados Police Force in a manner that is now turning out to be reprehensible in the extreme. For the first time in the history of our land, a significant number of senior police officers have accused the Police Services Commission of unlawfully interfering into the matter of promotions within the institution. Police officers must be allowed to engage their careers beyond the reach of unconstitutional acts of discrimination against them. By its action, this government has been dishonoring the letter and the spirit of the Constitution in its treatment of the Royal Barbados Police. The threat, my colleagues, to our society is clear. For to destroy the institution of the Royal Barbados Police Force is to tear asunder the fabric of society, of security, upon which the country has always rested. The situation gets worse. Under the Constitution of Barbados, the judiciary is that arm of the state to which the citizen must resort if he or she feels aggrieved by acts of the state. In its discharge of its duty, the judiciary must maintain absolute independence from external control and must especially insulate itself against the power of other arms of the state. The DLP government has dangerously displayed contempt for the Constitution, for its conventions, and for the rule of law in this land, in the form and in the content of its relationship with the judiciary. the first sign of lawlessness emerged within the clouds that engulfed the demission from office of the former Chief Justice. After the retirement of the former Chief Justice, the institution of the judiciary was further undermined when a senior distinguished judge was required to act in our office for a period exceeding a year. The high office of Chief Justice of Barbados was further diminished by the manner in which the appointment of the present Chief Justice was mangled. Late one Friday evening, after a week-long debate and estimates, the DLP exploited its parliamentary majority and hastily amended the Supreme Court of Judicial Act to allow enfranchisement of a single individual into the high office of Chief Justice of Barbados. We also cannot ignore the reports of discontent within a bar association that is now reportedly threatening unprecedented strike action in protest against further deterioration within the administration of justice in this country. The administration of justice has been further tarnished in the aftermath of a prosecutor suing the government for its failure to advertise the job that he has been performing for the last 6 years. Meanwhile, that position has been handed over to a former nursing assistant who has absolutely no experience in the courts. We can also point to the breakdown in good governance by the use of this government of constituency councils to do no more than to secure the ruling party's self-serving incursions into the local community of Barbados for their partisan benefits. We have seen the absolute breakdown in governance in the manner in which this government has mangled the Clico affair and has allowed the protection of its pal to trump the interests of 35,000 Barbadian policyholders and investors. Justice will soon be done. As regards the situation at Bagatelle, ordinary citizens are being forced to seek relief from the courts from actions by cabinet undertaken in defiance of the Town Planning Act. In 2016, comrades, this nation will celebrate the 50th anniversary of its independence. The best possible gift that can be conceived to salute this major milestone should be devising of a new structure of governance for Barbados that can serve to reposition government in the 21st century from a body of 20th century laws and systems to enable our system of governance to better meet the needs of our people in every aspect of their lives. We need to make greater provision for popular participation by the entire civil society in decision-making and in this country's economic prosperity. There is also, above all, now a need for greater protection of our citizens from a lawless government. It must never happen again. And for greater fairness, greater transparency, and for social justice to be exercised in every aspect of our public and private affairs. Some of the matters which should be in place by 2016, and we assure you will be in place by 2016, to make a new governance the real 50th birthday present for Barbados will include, first, a new constitution that focuses on the role of governance as opposed to the rule of government. Secondly, a Freedom of Information Act to provide greater transparency that balances the rights of individuals as against the capacity of government to comply. Third, the divestment of CBC and the issuance of broadcast licenses to facilitate an open environment for the flow of information in this country. Fourth, the complete revamping of the structures of statutory organizations to reflect greater and more effective participation in them by the entire civil society. Fifth, a redefined universal access to telecommunications to include from basic telephony to free Wi-Fi across the country. 6, the reform of the systems and procedures across all government departments upon which the public relies for the conduct of services. 7, the reform and the modernization of our parliament. It has become too porricky. 8, the reform of the estimates and budgetary process to facilitate greater scrutiny of government's proposed expenditure by Parliament and by the public. 9th, the reform of the court system and the creation of alternate dispute resolution to provide speedier and affordable access to justice. 10th, the reform of government's procurement system and the provision for the publication of all details performing to the award of all contracts by the government. 11th, the establishment of democratically elected zonal community councils to work in tandem with statutory boards and government departments to ensure a more effective delivery of services to our people at the community level. 12, the broadening of the composition of the social partnership to reflect the entire civil society. 13th, a redefinition of citizenship, and essentially a redefinition of our relationship of our society with our diaspora and with our people abroad. 14th, the establishment of a permanent advisory social justice commission. And finally, 15th, and above all, the creation of a new national mechanism to capture the imagination and the involvement of young people across all endeavors and all aspects of nation building. We believe that by these measures, Barbados will be changed for the better forever. I have thought long and hard about the simple messages I would like to leave to this conference to our party and to the people of our nation at this moment when Barbados finds itself deeply mired in crisis that threaten to overwhelm our society. I have perhaps found the message embodied in the memoirs of my own life that I started to prepare while I was at Cave Hill campus of the University of West Indies. Those memoirs, entitled A Country Boy, captures what it was like growing up in humble surroundings in pre-independent rural Barbados. I grew up the son of a carpenter, father, and a mother who started life as an agricultural worker. They were constantly buffeted by circumstances, by the sheer necessity of meeting the needs of a large family on very meager means. But whatever the circumstances, the message was clear. You may bow, you may bend, but you must never break. I can still recall the heat of the 3 o'clock sun on my brow during the Easter vacation of 1965. My other fellow students were preparing for the O-levels examination. But my mother had lost her job on the plantation. She was finding work wherever it could be found. And I was helping her as she tied canes all across St. Peter while she hummed, "I must have my Savior with me, for I dare not walk alone." She did not break. She went on to create her own business. I remember my parents waiting up for me when, as a student at Cave Hill campus, I had to walk home often through the wind and the rain, every step from Cave Hill to Rose Hill, because the last bus had gone. And always the same message: you may bow, You may bend, but you must never break. I remember my parents twisted with agony in 1975 and again in 1981 as they buried their daughters, aged 16 and aged 23, and turned again and faced the world. You may bow, you may bend, but you must never break. It is the message that I give to you and to all Barbados as I pledge to make sure that our nation's affairs are attended to in the future with all the care that a father can muster. We may bow, we may bend, but we must never break. And there is another simple message contained in the plaque that my mother gave me the day before she died. It is a simple message that I leave to you today as we together look to change Barbados for the better. It says, to be all and to be the best that you can be, you must dream of being more. May God continue to bless this Barbados Labour Party and bless our fair land now and forever. God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause, sir, please. Right Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur, our political leader and the next Prime Minister of Barbados.